Hello, everyone. This is the second set of notes about Earth's atmosphere. It's called Human Impacts on the Atmosphere. Human impacts on the atmosphere. Just like ancient photosynthetic bacteria once had a dramatic effect on the atmosphere, humans have recently had and are currently having some interesting impacts on our atmosphere. The hole in the ozone layer, acid rain, the role of greenhouse gases contributing to global climate change. For example, so this picture is of a forest that has been impacted by acid rain. One thing that acid rain does is change the pH of the soil, which can really mess with plants. But let's talk about the hole in the ozone layer. In the 1960s, humans started mass producing a chemical called chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs for short. This chemical was useful in aerosols, refrigerants, and air conditioners. In 1985, scientists started to realize that these CFCs were causing problems with the atmosphere. Specifically, they were causing a depletion of the ozone layer over Antarctica. This area is often described as having a hole in the ozone layer. Remember from the last set of notes that the ozone layer is in the stratosphere and it protects us from UV rays, which are potentially harmful to living cells. And so if that ozone layer is being depleted, we might have an uptick in skin cancer and stuff like that. Long story short, CFCs were banned through an international agreement called the Montreal Protocol in 1987, and alternative substances were developed that did not have this specific adverse environmental effect. So this was considered, it's often cited as an environmental victory, where we have um, multiple countries coming together and making a new rule that protected the environment. There is still a hole in the ozone layer, but recent reports have shown that it is getting a bit smaller. This picture shows the hole in the ozone layer above Antarctica. Acid rain. Rainwater is normally slightly acidic, pH of about 5.5, containing a small amount of weak carbonic acid. Remember, a neutral pH, like distilled water, would have a pH of 7. Acid rain is what happens when rainwater gains excess hydrogen or H plus ions from chemicals in the atmosphere. Chemicals that can cause acid rain are sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide. That's SO2 and NO. Two chemicals that enter the atmosphere from the burning of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are coal, oil, and natural gas. Once these compounds are in the atmosphere, wind can spread the effects over hundreds of miles. And here's another picture of a forest that has been impacted by acid rain. Acid rain robs soils of nutrients, which causes issues for trees and other plants. Acid rain changes the pH of aquatic environments, which kills invertebrates and has wide-ranging effects on these ecosystems. In 1970, Congress passed the Clean Air Act, which was legislation reducing the emissions of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide significantly in the United States. But acid rain is still an issue in other parts of the world. And here is a power plant burning some fossil fuels, putting some chemicals into the atmosphere. Fossil fuels and greenhouse gases. Under normal conditions, the greenhouse effect keeps our planet at a livable temperature. Burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. Both of these are greenhouse gases. And The concentration of these greenhouse gases is increasing, and global temperatures also are increasing, and there appears to be a correlation. To put it in the simplest possible terms, burning fossil fuels is increasing the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which is warming the planet. If we look at carbon dioxide in the atmosphere going back 800,000 years, and look at the temperature in Antarctica going back the same amount of time, you see a very similar trend over a long period of time. Weather versus climate. So just because you get a sunny day in January doesn't mean that that's global warming. That's just weather. Weather is the day-to-day state of the atmosphere at a given location. For example, it is raining right now in Richmond. Climate is the average weather over a long period of time, like 30 years or more. For example, the average June temperature in Paris is 17 degrees Celsius. So just because it snows doesn't mean the climate's not warming, and just because it's warm one day doesn't mean the climate is warming. It's more about average temperatures over long periods of time. And this can have an impact on precipitation patterns as well. So here's some statements are the examples of weather or climate. It's snowing outside. Average spring temperatures in Manitoba are 20 degrees Celsius. Monsoon season in Thailand peaks during September. It's going to be hot out tomorrow. So as a result of human activity, the planet is warming. The average surface temperature on the planet has risen 1.62 degrees Fahrenheit, which is equal to 0.9 degrees Celsius in the last 150 years. Most of this warming has taken place over the last 35 years. The last decade has featured the 5 warmest years on record. And here's the global temperature change from 1880, so going back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. You see that temperatures fluctuate, they change year to year, but overall, definitely going up. And one of the things that plays into this is our use of fossil fuels for energy, and the question is really, can we transition to alternative energy sources like wind power? You can see here another graph. This graph shows global energy use by source. It goes from 1965 to 2014. So this is globally how much energy is being used. It shows you the different types of energy. We've got coal, oil, and natural gas. Those are the primary energy sources being used worldwide. Hydroelectric power and nuclear are alternative energy sources that are being used somewhat as well. And then other renewables is the yellow section, the really tiny section that starts to appear in the 80s, but is still a very small portion of our energy budget globally. And one of the things that can result from this warming planet is sea level rise, which would definitely impact areas like this. This is Bangladesh. It is a very low-lying country. Basically, the whole country is at sea level, with the exception of some mountain regions. And recently, there's been some evidence that some of the oil and gas companies have known about this global climate change problem for a lot longer than it's been common scientific consensus, and that companies like Exxon took pains to cover up that data. And so countries around the world are acting to some degree about global climate change. The Kyoto Protocol is a United Nations sponsored treaty first developed in Kyoto, Japan in 1997. It has gone through several versions and finally took effect in 2005. In the Kyoto Protocol, industrialized nations are mandated to reduce carbon emissions to agreed upon targets in order to fight global climate change. Developing nations like China and India were asked to voluntarily comply. Kyoto was rejected by the United States in 2001, and the United States never took part in this agreement, in part because there was a lot of controversy over only asking certain nations to voluntarily comply while mandating that other nations would be reducing their emissions. So other countries like Canada and Australia, they also rejected the protocol, saying it wouldn't have any impact if a major polluter like the United States isn't signing on. So that was kind of the old agreement. More recently, there was an agreement in Paris similar to the Kyoto Protocol. It's called the Paris Climate Accord, but it was more aggressive. It requires all nations to cut their greenhouse gas pollution and to strengthen that commitment over time. It also required established powers to assist emerging nations in their green energy capacity. Barack Obama signed the U.S. up in 2016, and unfortunately, Donald Trump announced the U.S. would be withdrawing the following year. But Biden has promised to get us back on there. And so there is some people out there that think climate change isn't real. Um, but it is. But considering even if it weren't, all the stuff that we would want to do in order to combat climate change is actually just great for the planet. So there's really no downside except for oil companies make less money. All right, here is the second atmosphere notes, human impacts on the atmosphere. If you type it all up, it'll look like this. Pause the video here if you need to catch up. And thanks for watching.